Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and I just want to say I'm incredibly honored to be speaking here at the Baker Institute. I saw the list of panelists who were going to be appearing here. I saw more letters behind people's names than I see in a bowl of alphabet soup. PhDs and DAs and assistant chiefs and judges, and I kind of got to think, why am I here? My goodness, I'm just a guy who, grew up as a son of a musician, always been around people that had used marijuana in my life, and now I work for NORML, and I am the chapter outreach coordinator. I help coordinate 177 chapters around the country and around the world, including some fine people from Dallas-Fort Worth and Waco, Texas, who are here today. I also run NORML Show Live on the NORML Network, which is a live daily talk radio show where for 2 hours a day I talk to the people and I interview the people involved, some of the people that are in this room that are involved in fighting this war on drugs. So I think maybe why I'm here is because while I don't have any of that school book education on the issue of marijuana, I have a ton of real world experience here on the issue of marijuana. I'm thrilled here to be with Dr. Savet, and we've gotten to speak a few times, and he's a wonderful man, and as far as people who have worked for the ONDCP goes, a very gracious person who has told me to my face he does not want to see me put in a cage for my use of marijuana, and I appreciate that. Thank you. But it is kind of intimidating because the man's going to Harvard and getting a PhD at Harvard. I mean, my biggest academic achievement was I was the Boise State mascot in 1985. The Broncos. I mean, he's worked in the White House. I once ate at a Waffle House. But again, I think where I bring something to this debate is that I have skin in the game. I began smoking marijuana on July 4th, 1990, in a resort town called McCall, Idaho, with the guitar players in the band that I was playing with at that time. And I remember when that joint first went around the circle. And remember, my father is a drug addict and an alcoholic, and I'd always been told, just say no, drugs are bad, MK, don't do it, just don't do it. When I saw that joint go around, I thought, oh my God, I'm in a band with guys that do drugs. These guys do drugs. And I refused it the first couple times it came around. And I was really shocked because when I did refuse, I was a little worried because I'd heard about the peer pressure, and they all kind of went, okay. And just kept passing around. And after about 4 or 5 or 6 passes of this, and them giggling and just having a good old time and not really being any problem, I finally took a puff. And when I took that puff, I went, this is drugs? Really? This is what you were warning me about? I mean, I've been drinking since age 16. I've woken up in strange places. I'd had tequila scars. I mean, I've puked on my shoes. I've done some terrible things under alcohol. And when I smoked that joint, I went, really? This was the problem? It makes me happy and lightheaded and go to sleep and eat Funyuns? That's what you need to throw me in jail for? This is terrible. So I've got skin in the game. And because of that, under this war on drugs, I have been affected by this daily. The federal law right now for the possession of even a speck of marijuana is a misdemeanor with a possible 1-year prison term and a $1,000 fine. Now, it's probably not going to happen, but it exists. It's there. That law is there. And for the past few years, when I've been living in Oregon, I've been growing marijuana plants. And for just one marijuana plant, the federal penalty is a felony with 5 years, $250,000 fine. And if you're growing a lot of marijuana plants, like this fine woman's son is, you're actually eligible for the death penalty in this country.
And I'm proud of you.
Thank you. But a federal death penalty exists. We are one of 9 countries in the world that has a death penalty involved with marijuana. Now, you have to grow over 60,000 plants, make $2 million, $20 million over a certain number of years, continuing criminal enterprise, yada, yada, yada. But the fact exists, we have a death penalty for this plant. A death penalty. In Texas here, we've heard some of the folks talk about that, the misdemeanor, 6 months, probation, $2,000 fine, mandatory rehab. A plant is felony, 12 years, $10,000 fine. In Florida, it's 5-year felony for anything 21 grams or over. 21 of those sugar packets, 21 grams is about 3/4 of an ounce. Felony, 5-year sentence, $100,000 fine, and you lose your right to vote. And in Florida, you lose your right to vote as a felon permanently After 5 to 7 years, you can apply to a clemency board to maybe get your right to vote back. This has resulted in 8.2% of all Floridians of voting age being disenfranchised and 19.8% of African American voters being disenfranchised in the state of Florida. It's really hard to change the laws that criminalize you when you can't vote to change them. Even in my home state of Oregon, where people think, oh, well, hippy-dippy liberal, love fest, pot and love and patchouli and all that. Yes, it is decriminalized, less than an ounce is a ticket. You do get a 6-month driver's license suspension, even if you weren't driving. And a $1,000 fine. But over an ounce in the state of Oregon is a felony, 10-year sentence, $100,000 fine. We go from 28 grams as a ticket to 29 grams is a 10-year felony. So it isn't even good even in the state of Oregon, where people think it's all hippy-dippy sun and light. And the folks here, and I saw a slide up there that said, oh, there's only 0.3% of people in prison and 0.1. Well, first of all, sucks for them, huh? But for all the rest of the things that happen that have nothing to do with being in prison or being arrested. First of all, if you've been arrested, you can be considered a drug criminal for the rest of your life. That follows you around. If you're a student, you can lose your financial aid, because if someone's got a drug problem, the last thing we want them to have is a college education. You can lose your federal housing for being arrested for marijuana. It can be used against you in child custody cases. And these aren't just abstracts to me. These are my friends. Every person I know smokes marijuana. Every person I know and interact with directly smokes marijuana. And not just the, oh, I smoked a joint at the class reunion. I'm talking daily and weekly marijuana smokers. And not just medical smokers. People like me who just like to smoke pot. That's all we like, just like to smoke pot. And even without the arrest, we've got people here like myself who've been living in fear of police officers. When I saw this assistant chief up here talking about, the neighborhoods and the cities, I thought back to all the times when I wanted to call a cop, I wanted to interface with a police officer, but that thought was in the back of my head, better not. Are you sure you don't got something on you? You sure not going to come back to your house and want to check things out? You sure you're not going to want to bring a dog to your car? How many crimes go unreported? How many women live in domestic violence situations where they won't report the guy beating them because, well, they've got drugs, they might lose their kid? I mean, the tendrils of this are so intertwined, and I talk and deal with these people every day. And the bottom line is that this war on drugs essentially says to me, Russ Belville, the federal government thinks you ought to be in a cage because you like to smoke pot. Now, if you'd like to go home and drink, you can drink Crown Royal until you pass out. That's fine. If you want to smoke, you can buy cigarettes and smoke until you get lung cancer and die. Don't got a problem with that. But if you want to smoke a little pot that never killed anyone, makes you happy, and want to eat Funyuns, makes jazz sound good, we got to put you in a cage. I just think that's fundamentally wrong. Now, to this question, war on drugs has failed. Is legalization the answer? Well, as Russ Jones, the very well-named Russ Jones said, we don't have a war on drugs, we have a war on people. I have never seen a DEA agent point an automatic weapon at a marijuana plant. But a few of my friends working in dispensaries have had automatic weapons pointed at their heads. A few people that I've reported on have had armor-clad thugs breaking into their homes, throwing flashbang grenades, wearing body armor, shooting their dogs while their children are in the house. But I have never seen them point that gun at a plant. And while it is a war on people, it's not really a war on all people who use drugs. Like comedian Paul Mooney once said, I have the complexion of protection. I'm a middle-aged white guy. I'm not going to get busted for weed. Probably never. Probably never. So it's not a war on people who use drugs. It's a war on some people who use drugs. And wait a minute, it's not even really a war on drugs, because in this society we celebrate drugs. You can't turn on TV without seeing another drug ad. I mean, we got beer ads funding the Super Bowl. We got Viagra ads everywhere. Look, what's up with those two people in the bathtubs anyway? And we got the cartoon depression. Have you seen those drugs from the cartoon, the Abilify, where the woman's got depression? Is your antidepressant not helping? And she's got that robe of depression she wears around. Well, if that pill doesn't help you, we've got another pill to help the pill that doesn't help you. And notice that the depression robe never really goes away. It still kind of hangs out off the side. We're not curing anything. We're managing it. Because that's the comeback. That's where you get the comeback at the pharmaceutical company. So it's not a war on all people who use all drugs. It's just some people using some drugs. And in fact, we celebrate drugs. Even the evil drugs, cigarettes, even the evil one, the one we all know is awful and terrible, we at least tolerate it. I used to work at a company that had paid for by the company a shelter outside, because we're in Portland, Oregon, it rains a lot, right? A shelter outside so the nicotine addicts could go and get their fix. Sounds different when I say it that way than smoke break, doesn't it? Nicotine addicts to get their fix, paid for by the company, and willing to accept the productivity loss of people heading out every 2 hours for 15 minutes to do their drugs. So don't tell me we have a war on drugs, we think drugs are bad. It's just some drugs and some of the people that are using them are bad. And when we call it a war on drugs, it's not even really a war on drugs, it's a war on marijuana. As was cited earlier, 52% of all the rest of the war on drugs are for marijuana, 88% for possession alone. Here in Texas, it's 97% of all marijuana arrests are for possession, as they were talking about trace amounts and such too. So what we really have here is not a war on drugs. What we have here is a war on certain American citizens using non-pharmaceutical, non-alcoholic, tobacco-free drugs. That's what we have. So the first premise of the question, the war on drugs, is kind of not exactly a true premise. And the other part is, has failed. Has failed at what? What has it really failed at? Because if you look at this with the right perspective, the war on drugs is an incredible success. I mean, if you own pharmaceutical stock and you're worried about medical marijuana competing with Xanax or Paxil or Prozac or any of those drugs or the opiate drugs that you sell, well, the war on drugs is doing great to keep that natural cheap competition out of your market. If you are an owner of prison stocks or you work as a prison guard in California where the median income for a prison guard is $74,000 a year. By the way, speaking of well-funded drug lobby, that's twice my salary. We have, if you're a cop and you want to keep your thumb down on a certain neighborhood, a certain class of people, there's nothing better than the war on drugs for collecting fingerprints, getting people in the system, being able to shake them down, maybe find some other crime they might be up to. And if you're trying to provide jobs for underskilled, undereducated people, those jobs that have flown out to Mexico and China, the factory jobs, the manufacturing jobs we don't have anymore, the war on drugs was an incredible success in providing underground income for people, for keeping unemployment rates below what they would really be if we looked at inner city neighborhoods and tried to find out. I don't know already what's the black unemployment in most inner city neighborhoods, in the 15s, 20s, 30s? How much higher would it be if the kids that were dealing had to apply for unemployment instead? We would see massive amounts of unemployment. So if the war on drugs is all about creating jobs for cops and rehabs and prison guards and kids dealing in the streets, it's an amazing success. Well, let's take it at its face. Let's take it what we're really intending here. The war on drugs is a failure because of what Nixon said, right? Nixon said we're going to do a war on drugs, we're going to end abuse and dependence, reduce the harms, all that. Well, people who've been up here before have already told you all about that it hasn't really worked. So, is legalization the answer? Well, again, depends. Is it the answer to stopping all people from ever getting high and using drugs and never causing any harms? Not at all. No, no. In fact, if you legalize, as some people have suggested, there might be a slight uptick. There might be some people that have never tried pot who think, well, it's legal now, let me give it a shot. There might be people using pot now who think, oh, well, now that it's accessible and cheaper, I'll use more of it. But again, people are smoking pot now, and I haven't yet seen much harm from that in the first place. Maybe the legalization is the answer if our goal is to reduce harm. The harm of the crime and the prohibition-related violence, the harm of kids dealing in the high school parking lots, then maybe it is the answer. But for this entire question, I reject the initial premise. I reject the entire initial premise that it's any of the government's business or wherewithal or desire to stop me from smoking pot. I don't see the need to do so. I have been an employed citizen. I have worked and paid taxes for 20 years. I've consulted on Wall Street. I've worked in hospitals. I've done IT work, some of the most complex brain mechanics that you can get involved with, doing network analysis and such. I always figure if Carl Sagan could smoke pot, so could I. It didn't seem to hurt my brain much either. So when people are talking about this war on drugs, you always have to boil it down to the fact that we're talking about arresting people and messing with their lives in an attempt to stop them from smoking pot. And we must address, is that even really something that's worth doing? Somebody said, the DA here said, or the assistant chief, what do we have, stone society? Oh, we end up with a stone society. Heaven forbid we have more people that are mellow, get along with each other, laugh, eat some Funyuns now and then. Oh, what a terrible world it would be. Now, I don't mean to diminish the problems of other drugs. I have experience in that realm, too. Like I said, my father's a drug addict. My father was addicted to speed. He was addicted to marijuana. He was addicted to alcohol, mostly an alcoholic. But for all those years, my dad was an alcoholic, and I was suffering as a child from the things that happened. Him being away for 2 weeks at a time, him getting all drunk and a little wacky in the house, and the terrible things that happened to me as a kid. Not once did any group of cops ever try to break down the door, throw in a flashbang grenade, and haul my dad off for my well-being. Never happened. But if it had been the pot, they'd have done that. We let people be alcoholics, but we don't throw them in prison for it. We do deal with their alcoholism if it causes problems to other people. But for the alcohol itself, we don't throw them in prison. And this is happening not just to random statistics. I'm going to give you the stats. 102 million people have tried it. 26 million people in America will smoke pot this year. That's more tokers than Texans. They said, don't mess with Texas, don't mess with tokers. We are nothing to fear. There's nothing scary about us. Our smoking pot is not going to cause us to run riot in the streets, go crazy, start shooting heroin or anything like that. We are productive, responsible, law-abiding citizens. Now I know some of you might see, well, I see those pot rallies and all the tie-dye hippies and long hair and the piercings and the dreadlocks and, you know, they're a little crazy and they support Ron Paul and stuff. Whatever stereotype you want to put in there. But understand that because of the illegality of marijuana, you are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. The people with nothing to lose. The people who can be out and proud. You're not seeing the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the cops even, who use marijuana because they can't be out and proud. They can't talk about this. Now, and one more stat. 2.6 million people in America are just like me. They smoke pot every day this month. 2.6 million people smoke pot every day this month. That's more than the population of Houston, Texas. We cannot have a policy that says the entire population of Houston, Texas are criminals. It makes no sense. And finally, to wrap up, whenever we talk about this war on drugs and the other side wants to talk about what we're going to, what the effects might be, we get a lot of the muddying of the waters with weird statistics, things like, well, we can't legalize marijuana because alcohol and tobacco only bring in $40 billion worth of taxes, but they cost $400 billion worth of social effects. Yeah, that would be scary if marijuana were alcohol or tobacco. But alcohol and tobacco, if I'm not mistaken, kill people and are highly addictive. And marijuana is not. So I'm not scared by that. And there's a whole lot, we don't really lock people up. Not a whole lot of them. Well, even one person locked up for using marijuana is one too many. And finally, this idea that we want to cut the head off the snake. I heard that. We're going to cut the head off the snake. We're going to go after the big guns. The big guns like Patricia Spotted Crow, just north of us in Oklahoma, who's doing 12 years in prison for the sale of $31 worth of marijuana. 2 dime bags she sold. She's got 12 years in prison, separated from her children. What about the children, right? How about Dale Schaefer and Molly Fry, medical marijuana providers in California, growing marijuana under the state's Prop 215 in accordance and cooperation with their state, county, and local people, busted by the feds, now serving 5 years in prison each. Dr. Fry is a cancer survivor, breast cancer. She was growing it for other cancer survivors. She's in prison. And a friend of mine from Georgia, whose daughter was rousted from her bed in the middle of the night, 16 years old, grabbed by her hair by SWAT teams with assault rifles pointed at her head because some kid in her class knocked her off for having a gram or two. These are real stories happening to real people. So why not legalize marijuana? Why not? Well, it's not harmless, but it's not alcohol. It's not tobacco. It's far less harmful than that. The results we've seen with alcohol and tobacco show that we can legalize the worst of drugs and yet bring down the harm from them through regulation and education. And it separates marijuana from those hard drugs that are truly devastating and cause the faces of meth that we were scandalized by. And finally, remember, when anybody, there we go. When anybody says that we need to continue what we're doing or make cosmetic changes around the edges, they are saying one of two things. Russ Belville needs to be in a cage, or Russ Belville needs to be forced into a rehab he doesn't need, forced to be mandatorily re-educated, forced to be P-tested when he's not causing harm to anyone. Thank you for your time.